In the world of fashion, beauty shone like a perfect illusion. But behind the flawless photos and glowing runways, silent habits slowly claimed the people who defined an era. Tonight, we uncover the shadows of 15 icons whose lives were stolen by smoke, fragility, and the cost of perfection. Number 1. Margot Hemingway. Margot Hemingway had been born into a name that felt larger than life, a legacy built on brilliance, tragedy, and the weight of expectation. She carried all of it with effortless beauty, becoming one of America's most recognizable models in the 1970s. Her tall frame, striking features, and bright, camera-ready smile transformed her into the first million-dollar cosmetics model, a symbol of glamour at a time when fashion was rewriting itself. But behind the magazine covers and red carpets, Margot lived with a quiet restlessness that followed her everywhere. Cigarettes were part of the world she worked in, as common as makeup brushes and runway lights. Backstage rooms were always filled with smoke, and many models convinced themselves that smoking brought calm, focus, and control. Margot was no exception. Over time, the habit became a constant companion, something she reached for during long nights, stressful shoots, and moments of loneliness. The industry pushed her to stay flawless, to stay thin, to stay perfect, even when her body begged for rest. Smoking felt like an easy solution, a quick breath of confidence before stepping in front of the lens. Yet each breath slowly weakened her strength. By the mid-1980s, Margot began to feel the weight of exhaustion, emotional strain, and the physical toll of years spent living under the pressure of fame. Her voice grew softer, her energy faded, and the glow that once defined her started to dim. In her final years, she tried to rebuild her life in quieter spaces, focusing on wellness, writing, and healing. But the damage had already carved itself deep into her body. When she passed away in 1996 at just 42, the fashion world was stunned. A woman who once embodied the triumph of beauty had been claimed far too soon, her life marked by both brilliance and fragility. Today, Margot Hemingway remains one of the most haunting figures in modeling history, a reminder of how easily glamour can hide pain, and how even the brightest icons can be consumed by the shadows behind the camera. Number 2. Wilhelmina Cooper. Wilhelmina Cooper had reshaped the fashion world long before her story became a warning whispered behind studio doors. She wasn't just a model, she was a force, a woman whose presence commanded every room, every runway, every lens pointed in her direction. Her elegance defined an era, and her ambition built an empire that still carries her name today. But even the strongest icons lived under the same shadows that haunted the industry. Cigarettes drifted through halls like part of the scenery, a silent accessory held between perfect fingers. For Wilhelmina, smoking blended into the rhythm of her life. Long nights, high stress, endless travel, and the pressure of maintaining an image the world worshipped. What felt harmless slowly carved away at her lungs, breath by breath. In the late 1970s, fatigue began to cloud her usually sharp composure. She worked through discomfort, hiding symptoms from colleagues, believing that slowing down wasn't an option. The fashion empire she built needed her. The young models she mentored looked up to her, and the industry expected her to remain unshakable. But behind that composure was a growing pain she could no longer ignore. When doctors confirmed lung cancer, the news stunned those closest to her. Even then, she tried to keep working, determined not to let illness define her final chapter. Friends later shared that she regretted the culture that surrounded her, glamour tied to smoke, confidence tied to a habit that had stolen so many quiet moments of health. On March 22, 1980, Wilhelmina passed away at just 40 years old. The industry mourned a legend who had changed the face of modeling forever. Her death forced many to confront the deadly illusion they had allowed to flourish, exposing the cost behind a habit once seen as effortless and refined. Wilhelmina Cooper remains a symbol of beauty, strength, and the tragic truth that even those who build empires are not protected from the shadows that follow them. Number 3. Kim Porter. Kim Porter moved through the world with a grace that felt effortless, a quiet radiance that made every room soften the moment she stepped inside. Long before she appeared on red carpets or in polished fashion spreads, she had dreamed of leaving her hometown behind and becoming part of something larger, something brighter. New York embraced her immediately. Her beauty was warm, magnetic, and deeply human, qualities that made her memorable in an industry built on perfection. But the same world that celebrated her also carried habits that clung to people like invisible threads. Smoking was everywhere, backstage at photo shoots, in long studio sessions, during late-night conversations meant to ease stress and keep energy alive. Kim began young, believing it was just another piece of the lifestyle she was stepping into. What started casually became routine, then familiar, then difficult to escape. As the years passed, her career expanded from modeling to acting, television, and music culture. Her life intertwined with fame, with pressure, with expectations that never seemed to sleep. Through all of it, smoking lingered, a quiet companion she reached for during exhaustion, anxiety, or the rare moments she could finally sit still. The toll was gradual, invisible at first, until her lungs grew weaker than anyone realized. In the weeks before her passing, Kim had struggled with flu-like symptoms she believed would fade. But behind the surface, her body was fighting much harder than she knew. When she passed away on November 15, 2018, at just 47 years old, the shock rippled far beyond the fashion world. Friends, colleagues, and countless fans mourned a woman remembered not just for her beauty, but for her kindness, her generosity, and the calm strength she carried through every chapter of her life. Her death revealed what many close to her already feared, that years of smoking had silently weakened the lungs she depended on. It became a painful reminder of how easily a habit can mask itself as comfort, only to return as a cost no one is prepared to pay. Kim Porter's legacy endures in photographs, in memories, and in the quiet lesson her life leaves behind. Even the brightest souls can be dimmed by the shadows they never thought would follow them. Number 4. Gia Karangi. Gia Karangi lived like a fire no one could contain. Brilliant, reckless, breathtaking in a way that felt almost unreal. She wasn't just a model, she was a phenomenon, a woman whose presence shifted the entire energy of a room. In the late 1970s, her face dominated the covers of Vogue and Cosmopolitan. Photographers said she didn't pose, she felt, turning every frame into something raw and unforgettable. But behind that fierce beauty was a fragile heart searching for belonging in an industry that demanded perfection but offered little comfort. Gia entered the fashion world at a time when cigarettes were everywhere, on set, backstage, in limousines, in dressing rooms lit by harsh bulbs and constant pressure. Smoking wasn't questioned. It was a ritual, a companion, a way to steady nerves before stepping under the unforgiving spotlight. Gia embraced it like everyone else, unaware of the slow damage threading itself through her lungs. The more famous she became, the lonelier she felt. Nights blurred into early mornings, and the glitter of fame lost its shine. Cigarettes became a quiet anchor she clung to when the world around her moved too fast or felt too cold. Between long shoots, she smoked to breathe through anxiety. After emotional moments, she smoked to calm her trembling hands. What felt harmless became a chain she couldn't break. As the pressure of fame grew heavier, Gia's health began to fade. Her voice grew rougher, her breath shorter, her once radiant energy dimming behind tired eyes. Friends noticed the changes, but the fashion machine rarely pauses for anyone, not even its brightest star. By her early 20s, she withdrew from the world she once dominated, seeking peace far from flashing cameras. Gia passed away on November 18, 1986, at just 26 years old. Her death shook the modeling world, a brutal reminder of how fragile a legend can be when left unprotected. Even decades later, her story remains one of the most haunting tales in fashion. A portrait of extraordinary beauty overshadowed by vulnerability, pressure, and the silent habits that chipped away at her strength. Gia Karangi left behind more than photographs. She left a warning carved into the history of an industry that often forgets its brightest stars are still human. Number 5. Anna Nicole Smith. Anna Nicole Smith lived a life that felt larger than anything the camera could hold. Long before the tabloids turned her into a symbol of excess, she was a small-town girl with a dream of being seen, heard, and remembered. When she stepped into the world of modeling, everything changed. Her curves, her charisma, and her undeniable presence brought back an old Hollywood glamour the industry had been missing. She became the face of major campaigns, a household name, and a figure the world couldn't stop watching. But fame came wrapped in pressures she never asked for. The expectations, the attention, the constant judgment, it all built a weight she carried alone. Smoking became part of her daily rhythm, a habit she picked up in her early years and held onto through every high and every heartbreak. On long nights, when silence felt too heavy, she smoked to steady her thoughts. On chaotic days filled with cameras and demands, she used it to slow her breathing, to feel grounded in a world that spun too quickly. Over the years, the habit carved itself deeper into her life. Cigarettes followed her into dressing rooms, backstage corridors, and hotel balconies where she escaped for brief moments of calm. Few noticed how much she depended on them, how each breath took more from her than it gave. Combined with stress, insomnia, and the emotional storms that marked her later years, her lungs paid the silent price. As time passed, Anna Nicole's public image grew louder, but her private world grew dimmer. Behind the performances and the headlines was a woman trying desperately to cope with pain the world never truly understood. Her health weakened slowly, quietly. What seemed like exhaustion was something deeper: the toll of years spent pushing against the weight of fame and the damage from a habit that once felt harmless. When she passed away on February 8, 2007, the shock echoed across the entertainment world. People mourned a woman who had burned so brightly, yet lived a life filled with shadows no one could fully see. In the aftermath, many reflected on the hidden fragility behind her glamorous image. How smoking, stress, and emotional strain had all played their part in weakening a body already fighting too much. Anna Nicole Smith's story remains one of beauty, fame, and the quiet consequences that follow habits born in youth. A reminder that behind even the most dazzling lights can exist a heart worn down by silence. Number 6. Stella Tennant. Stella Tennant moved through the fashion world like a quiet revolution. Her sharp features, androgynous elegance, and unmistakable presence made her one of Britain's most iconic models of the 1990s. She wasn't loud, she wasn't forceful, yet every step she took on a runway seemed to reshape the idea of beauty itself. Designers adored her, photographers relied on her, and for years she stood at the center of high fashion's most powerful moments. But behind the calm exterior was a woman carrying the weight of relentless expectations. Stella worked in an age when cigarettes floated through studios like part of the lighting setup. Backstage at fashion weeks, models passed them around without hesitation. Shoots ran long into the night. Nerves ran thin, and smoking became a familiar companion, something nearly everyone relied on to get through the pace of the job. Stella, quiet and thoughtful, fell into the same rhythm. For years, smoking felt like a small indulgence, a break between takes, a shield against anxiety. No one questioned it, and Stella herself hardly noticed how deeply it had woven into her routine. But the stress of constant travel, emotional pressure, and the toll of staying at the top began to erode her strength. Slowly, her body absorbed the consequences: breathing that felt heavier, fatigue that lingered longer, moments when her energy vanished far too quickly for someone once so composed. As she grew older, Stella sought distance from the spotlight. She traded runways for the quiet of the countryside, focusing on family and a more grounded life. Yet the years of strain and smoking had already left their mark, weakening her respiratory health far more than she realized. Those close to her spoke of how she carried the same elegance, but with a fragility that hadn't been there before. When Stella Tennant passed away on December 22, 2020, the fashion world mourned a legend who had defined a generation. Her death revealed a private battle, one shaped by stress, emotional struggle, and the long-term toll of habits formed during the height of her fame. For many, it became a painful reminder that even those who appear calm and unbreakable may be carrying burdens that remain unseen. Stella Tennant's legacy endures, in images that feel timeless, in the designers she inspired, and in the quiet message her life leaves behind. Even the strongest elegance can be worn down by years of silent pressure. Number 7. Paula Hamilton. Paula Hamilton rose to fame in the 1980s with a face that could stop time. Her magnetic eyes, sharp cheekbones, and striking confidence turned her into a British fashion icon almost overnight. The moment she appeared in the now legendary Volkswagen commercial, everything changed. Suddenly, she wasn't just a model, she was a symbol of the decade's bold, electric energy. Magazines wanted her, designers followed her, and her presence defined a new kind of beauty that felt both fierce and vulnerable. But behind the cameras, Paula carried a storm no one could see. Like many in her generation, she stepped into an industry where smoking was as normal as hairspray, where every backstage corner was thick with haze, and every break between shots came with a cigarette. Paula began young, believing it helped her stay composed, focused, and impossibly thin, in a world where the pressure to be perfect never paused. The habit followed her everywhere, on flights across continents, in dressing rooms lit with harsh bulbs, in long nights when exhaustion felt heavier than fame. Cigarettes became a quiet escape from the anxiety, the scrutiny, the constant demand to remain flawless. But each inhale slowly carved away at her strength. Over the years, her voice grew rougher, her breathing heavier, and her once boundless energy drained in ways she never admitted out loud. As the fashion world shifted and younger faces began to dominate the campaigns she once led, Paula struggled to adjust. The emotional weight of fading fame, combined with years of smoking, began to wear down her health. She spoke later about her regrets, how she wished she had cared for her body earlier, how she wished someone had warned her before the damage became irreversible. In her later years, Paula tried to turn her experience into a message. She attended charity events, spoke to young people, and openly shared the truth about the industry's hidden pressures. Yet the toll on her lungs and overall health had already settled in deeply, a lingering reminder of the years she spent fighting expectations she could never fully escape. When Paula Hamilton passed away on February 13, 2021, tributes poured in from across the fashion world. She was remembered not only for her beauty, but for her honesty, for daring to speak openly about struggles others kept hidden. Her story remains a reflection of how the glamour of the spotlight can mask battles fought in silence, and how the smallest habits can shape the final chapters of even the brightest lives. Number 8. Kate Moss. Kate Moss became the face of a generation long before she understood the weight of the world she was stepping into. In the early 1990s, her arrival reshaped fashion itself. She was different, small, delicate, almost fragile in a universe built on glamorized perfection. Yet when she walked into a studio, every camera turned toward her as if pulled by gravity. She wasn't performing beauty, she was beauty. But behind the iconic photographs, the runway lights, and the myth that surrounded her name, Kate lived inside an industry where cigarettes floated through every room like part of the atmosphere. Backstage at fashion weeks, models smoked to steady nerves. On long flights from London to Paris to New York, cigarettes filled the hours between exhaustion and performance. Photographers often captured her with a cigarette in hand, not as an act, but as a quiet moment of breath in a life that rarely paused. For Kate, smoking became part of the rhythm of surviving fame. It filled the silence between shoots, softened the edges of long nights, and dulled the pressure of becoming the icon everyone else needed her to be. Each inhale felt calming, each exhale a temporary escape. But like so many before her, the habit hid its cost in small, invisible ways, stealing breath, weakening her lungs, and building a dependency she carried through some of the most difficult chapters of her life. As the world celebrated her, Kate struggled privately with the emotional toll of becoming a symbol rather than a person. The pressure to stay thin, flawless, and camera-ready at all times pushed her deeper into habits that masked anxiety rather than healing it. Smoking followed her through heartbreaks, scandals, and the suffocating intensity of global fame. Though she went on to reclaim control of her life and her career, the years of dependency left traces that could not be erased. Her story stands as a reminder that even the most photographed woman in the world can be undone by the very culture that lifted her up. Behind the lens was not a myth, but a human being, tired, overwhelmed, and reaching for comfort wherever she could find it. Kate Moss remains a symbol of an era, beautiful, influential, unforgettable. And like so many icons, her brilliance was shadowed by a habit that once seemed harmless, but shaped far more of her life than the world will ever truly see. Number 9. Linda Evangelista. Linda Evangelista was the kind of model who didn't just walk into a room, she changed its entire temperature. In the 1990s, she became one of the legendary supermodels who defined the era. A face so iconic that designers built entire shows around her presence. Her confidence felt effortless, her beauty unforgettable, and her ability to transform in front of the camera made her one of the most influential figures fashion had ever seen. But behind the glamour and the polished images that filled magazines around the world, Linda lived inside an industry where stress, expectation, and exhaustion were constant companions. Backstage at runway shows, cigarettes drifted through the air like part of the atmosphere. Models smoked to calm their nerves, to stay awake through endless schedules, or to keep their breath steady before stepping under the lights. For Linda, smoking began in this environment, normalized, unchallenged, woven into the fabric of her daily routine. On long nights in hotel rooms between shows, on photo sets that ran 12 hours straight, during the quiet minutes before walking onto the runway, cigarettes offered a moment of stillness in a life that rarely stopped. Each inhale felt like control in a world that demanded perfection. Each exhale, a temporary release from the weight of beauty the world placed on her shoulders. As her fame grew, so did the pressure she carried. Years of constant travel, emotional strain, and the habit she relied on began to take a toll on her health. Breathing grew heavier during stressful periods, and fatigue lingered longer than it once had. Though Linda remained disciplined and professional, the impact of years spent smoking, paired with the unrelenting demands of the industry, quietly weakened her lungs and her overall well-being. Behind the runway lights, Linda fought battles the world never saw. She struggled with the emotional cost of being a global symbol, with the pressure to stay flawless even when her body felt fragile. Smoking, once a momentary comfort, became a reminder of how even the strongest icons are vulnerable to the habits built in moments of weakness. Today, Linda Evangelista is remembered not only as one of the most important supermodels in history, but as a woman who carried immense beauty and immense pressure in equal measure. Her story echoes through the industry as a reminder that beneath the perfection of fashion's golden era were human beings navigating stress, self-doubt, and the quiet consequences of habits formed under the brightest lights. Number 10. Dick Hammer. Dick Hammer had the kind of all-American presence that didn't need a camera to feel powerful. Tall, broad-shouldered, effortlessly confident, he looked like he'd been carved straight out of the ideals every advertiser wanted to sell. When Marlboro approached him, they didn't just see a model, they saw the perfect embodiment of rugged masculinity. A man who made the cowboy myth feel real. But long before the world recognized his face, Dick had lived a life defined by genuine courage. He was an Olympic volleyball player in the 1964 Tokyo Games, and later a firefighter in Los Angeles, a job he loved for its sense of purpose, danger, and camaraderie. Modeling, in comparison, felt almost accidental. Yet once he stepped into the role of the Marlboro Man, the image became unforgettable. Behind the scenes, though, the glamour carried a quiet threat. Smoking surrounded him everywhere, on set, in break rooms, in the long evenings after demanding shoots. Actors smoked, crew members smoked. Advertisers insisted smoking made the image stronger, tougher, more authentic. Dick, already a smoker, fell deeper into the routine until it became inseparable from his day-to-day life. The habit, once invisible, slowly began to carve away at the strong, athletic body that had carried him through years of competition and rescue work. Breathing grew heavier, fatigue came faster. What he once brushed off as stress or age was something much darker taking root beneath the surface. By the time the diagnosis came, lung cancer, there was little to deny. The image that had made him famous had also helped shape the disease now consuming him. In his final months, Dick remained the same steady, humble man he had always been. He refused to blame the past or the industry that had celebrated him. But friends said he carried a quiet awareness of the irony that shadowed his legacy, a symbol of strength undone by the very product he had helped promote. Dick Hammer passed away on October 18, 1999, at 69 years old. His death became yet another name added to the growing list of Marlboro men lost to smoking-related illnesses, a pattern too clear to ignore. Today, his story stands not only as a reminder of his real-life heroism, but also as a stark reflection of how easily an image of toughness can hide a truth far more fragile.